What if I told you that the very vegetables sitting in your refrigerator right now, the ones you're eating because you genuinely believe they're protecting your heart and your brain, could actually be quietly pushing your stroke risk higher with every single meal? I know that sounds completely backwards. I know it goes against everything you've been told, but stay with me for the next 20 minutes, because what I'm about to share with you is based on real science, and it could genuinely change how you eat and how long you live. We live in a world where eat your vegetables has been treated like gospel, an unbreakable rule that nobody questions, and for the most part, vegetables are extraordinarily good for you. But here's the thing that almost nobody is talking about. Not all vegetables are created equal, and for certain people under certain conditions, specific vegetables that are universally marketed as health foods can actually create a cascade of biological effects that elevate the risk of stroke in ways that are subtle, slow, and incredibly easy to miss until it's too late. So today we are going to break this down completely. We're going to talk about which vegetables are involved, why they cause problems, who is most at risk, and most importantly, what you can actually do about it. Let's start with the first major category, and this one surprises almost everyone: spinach, kale, Swiss chard, and beet greens. These are the celebrities of the health food world. Influencers blend them into smoothies, doctors recommend them, grocery stores put them front and center with words like superfood plastered all over the packaging. And for many people, they truly are excellent foods. But here's where the story gets complicated. These leafy greens are among the highest dietary sources of a compound called vitamin K1, also known as phylloquinone. Vitamin K1 plays a crucial role in blood clotting. It activates proteins in your body that help your blood coagulate, which is essential for healing wounds. But when you are one of the millions of people worldwide who take anticoagulant medications, particularly warfarin, which is also sold under the brand name Coumadin, this becomes a serious problem. Warfarin works by interfering with vitamin K-dependent clotting factors. It thins your blood to prevent dangerous clots from forming in arteries and veins, clots that can travel to the brain and cause a stroke. Your doctor carefully calculates your warfarin dose to achieve a very specific INR level, which is a measure of how long it takes your blood to clot. When you suddenly eat a large amount of spinach or kale, your vitamin K intake spikes, your blood clotting activity increases, your INR drops, and your blood becomes thicker than it should be, and thicker blood means a much higher risk of forming exactly the kind of clot that causes an ischemic stroke. What makes this even more dangerous is that the effect is inconsistent. People eat varying amounts of these greens on different days, which causes their INR to swing up and down like a pendulum, creating an environment where clots can form unpredictably. Studies published in journals like Thrombosis and Hemostasis have repeatedly confirmed that uncontrolled vitamin K intake is one of the leading reasons why warfarin patients end up outside of their therapeutic range, and outside of that range, stroke risk climbs dramatically. Now you might be thinking, I don't take warfarin, so I'm safe, and you might be right, but let's keep going because this next one affects far more people. Let's talk about high oxalate vegetables and what they do to your cardiovascular system over time. Spinach is actually on this list twice because it is one of the highest oxalate foods on the planet. Also on the list are beets, rhubarb, Swiss chard again, and even sweet potatoes when consumed in large quantities. Oxalates are naturally occurring compounds that plants use as a defense mechanism. When you eat them, they bind to minerals in your gut, particularly calcium, and form calcium oxalate crystals. Now, most people know this is connected to kidney stones, but what they don't know is the connection to cardiovascular health and stroke risk. Here is the mechanism that researchers have been studying closely. When oxalate levels are chronically high in your blood, a condition called hyperoxaluria, it doesn't just cause kidney stones. Oxalate crystals can deposit in blood vessel walls, contributing to a process called vascular calcification. Vascular calcification is essentially the hardening and stiffening of your arteries, and this is one of the most well-established risk factors for stroke. Stiff arteries can't regulate blood pressure as effectively. They're more prone to developing plaques, and those plaques are more prone to rupturing, which is precisely what triggers many ischemic strokes. Furthermore, high oxalate intake has been shown to reduce your body's absorption of magnesium, a mineral that is critically important for keeping blood vessels relaxed and for preventing hypertension. When your magnesium levels are consistently low because oxalates are blocking absorption, your blood pressure tends to rise. And elevated blood pressure is the single biggest risk factor for stroke across the entire world, responsible for nearly half of all stroke deaths globally. Now let's talk about something that affects a completely different group of people, and this is one that often catches health-conscious individuals completely off guard. We need to talk about fermented vegetables, pickles, kimchi, sauerkraut, and other salt-preserved vegetables. These foods have been experiencing a massive resurgence in popularity because of their probiotic content. The gut health movement has put them on a pedestal, and yes, the beneficial bacteria in traditionally fermented vegetables are genuinely valuable for your microbiome, but there is a serious catch that the wellness world tends to whisper past, and that is the sodium content. A single cup of commercial sauerkraut can contain between 700 and 900 milligrams of sodium. A serving of kimchi at a Korean restaurant, depending on the preparation, can easily reach 500 to over 700 milligrams. The American Heart Association recommends no more than 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day for most adults, and ideally closer to 500 milligrams for people who already have elevated blood pressure or heart disease. When people eat fermented vegetables multiple times a day, thinking they're doing something excellent for their health, they can very easily push their sodium intake into a range that significantly raises blood pressure. And elevated blood pressure, as we just discussed, is the #1 stroke risk factor on the planet. The irony here is genuinely painful. Someone doing everything they believe to be right, carefully incorporating gut-healthy fermented foods into every meal, could be unknowingly driving their blood pressure upward and increasing their stroke risk day by day. There is also a newer and particularly fascinating line of research linking the gut microbiome directly to stroke risk through a compound called TMAO, which stands for trimethylamine N-oxide. Certain gut bacteria, when they process specific nutrients found in various vegetables and plant foods, produce TMAO as a byproduct. Elevated levels of TMAO in the blood have been independently associated with higher risks of cardiovascular events, including stroke. The science here is still evolving, but it adds another layer to the understanding that the relationship between plant foods and cardiovascular risk is far more nuanced than the simple vegetables good, everything else bad narrative we've been handed. Let's now talk about nightshade vegetables, specifically tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, and potatoes. Nightshades contain compounds called solanines and lectins, and while the mainstream medical community still debates the degree of clinical significance, there is a body of evidence suggesting that for people with pre-existing inflammatory conditions or autoimmune disorders, these compounds can contribute to increased systemic inflammation. Why does that matter for stroke? Because inflammation plays a central role in the development of atherosclerosis, which is the buildup of plaques inside arteries. Inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein and interleukin-6 are consistently elevated in people who go on to have strokes. Chronic low-grade inflammation, driven partly by dietary choices, slowly erodes the integrity of blood vessel walls, makes plaques less stable, and increases the likelihood of the kind of arterial rupture or blockage that results in stroke. Tomatoes deserve an additional mention for a separate reason. They are high in a specific compound called tyramine, particularly when cooked, concentrated into paste or sauce, or canned. People who are taking certain classes of antidepressants, called MAO inhibitors, must be extremely careful with tyramine-rich foods, because when tyramine builds up in the system due to impaired metabolism, it can trigger sudden and severe spikes in blood pressure, a phenomenon called a hypertensive crisis, which is a direct medical emergency and a significant acute stroke risk. This interaction is well documented in pharmacology, and yet many patients are not given thorough enough dietary guidance when they start these medications. Now let me talk about something that is particularly relevant for people following plant-based or vegetarian diets, because there is a critical nutritional gap that many vegetables, no matter how carefully chosen, simply cannot fill. And that gap directly connects to stroke risk. Many of the vegetables people eat most enthusiastically are absolutely terrible sources of vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 is essential for the breakdown of an amino acid called homocysteine. When B12 levels are low, homocysteine accumulates in the blood. Elevated homocysteine is a well-established independent risk factor for stroke. It damages the inner lining of blood vessels, promotes the formation of blood clots, and accelerates atherosclerosis. A landmark meta-analysis published in the British Medical Journal found that reducing homocysteine levels through B vitamin supplementation could lower stroke risk by up to 25%. People who rely heavily on vegetables without ensuring adequate intake of B12, folate and B6, whether through fortified foods, eggs, dairy, fish or supplements, can end up with chronically elevated homocysteine levels without ever knowing it, because there are no obvious early symptoms. Their diet looks impeccably clean on the surface, but the biochemistry underneath is quietly working against them. Let's also spend a moment talking about high-nitrate vegetables, because this is another double-edged sword. Beetroot, arugula, spinach, celery, and radishes are all extremely high in dietary nitrates. When you eat these vegetables, your body and the bacteria in your mouth convert the nitrates to nitrites and then to nitric oxide, which dilates blood vessels, lowers blood pressure, and improves circulation. This is genuinely one of the most beneficial things these vegetables do, and the research on beetroot juice and athletic performance and blood pressure is compelling. However, and this is critically important, for people who have blood pressure that is already quite low, people with a condition called hypotension, or people taking nitrate-based medications for heart conditions like nitroglycerin, the additional blood pressure lowering effect of a diet very high in these vegetables can cause blood pressure to drop to dangerous levels. When blood pressure falls too low, insufficient blood reaches the brain, and this can trigger what's called an ischemic stroke due to cerebral hypofusion. This is far less common than hypertension-driven stroke, but it is real, it is documented, and it disproportionately affects elderly individuals who are more likely to already be on multiple cardiovascular medications. So what do you actually do with all of this information? Because I want to be absolutely clear, the answer is not to stop eating vegetables. The answer is to eat intelligently, with a genuine understanding of your own health status and how specific foods interact with your unique body. The first and most important step is to know your own medical situation. If you are on warfarin or any anticoagulant, you need to have a conversation with your doctor about consistent vitamin K intake, which means eating roughly the same amount of leafy greens each week, rather than swinging between almost none and enormous amounts. Consistency, not elimination, is the key. Second, if you have a history of kidney stones or vascular disease, work with your doctor to evaluate your oxalate intake and ensure your magnesium and calcium levels are within healthy ranges. Third, read the sodium content on every jar of fermented vegetables you buy. Make fermented vegetables a complement to your diet, not the foundation of every meal, and choose low-sodium versions when available. Fourth, if you are following a plant-based diet, please take vitamin B12 seriously. Get your homocysteine levels tested. It is a simple blood test, and it is one of the most underutilized cardiovascular risk markers available to you. Fifth, if you are on blood pressure medication or are elderly and prone to dizziness, talk to your doctor before dramatically increasing your intake of high-nitrate foods like beetroot juice. The broader lesson here is one of biochemical individuality. The same plate of food can have very different effects in two different human bodies depending on their genetics, their medications, their gut microbiome composition, their existing health conditions, and dozens of other variables. The wellness industry has an enormous financial incentive to sell you simple rules and universal superfoods, but your health doesn't operate according to simple rules. Your health is complex, and it deserves a complex, personalized approach. The three things you need to take away from this video are these. First, high oxalate and high vitamin K vegetables are not dangerous for most people, but they absolutely can be for people on blood thinners or with specific kidney and vascular conditions. Second, fermented vegetables, while probiotic-rich, carry a sodium burden that can meaningfully raise blood pressure and stroke risk when consumed in excess. Third, no vegetable-heavy diet automatically guarantees complete nutritional coverage, and deficiencies in B12 and the resulting elevation in homocysteine represent a silent, underappreciated stroke risk that millions of health-conscious people are currently walking around with right now. If you found this video genuinely eye-opening and you believe this is the kind of information that could protect someone you love, please share it with them today. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a video like this one. Hit the like button if you learned something new, and drop a comment below telling me what health topic you want me to break down next. I read every single comment, and your suggestions directly shape the content I create for you. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.